Hi.
And you'll do it now.
Okay, so we're not gonna go through all that again. I've read our mission statement to you a number of times. We won't do that one more time. I think everybody's been here before. Yeah, so the housekeeping, just for those of you who haven't been here before, we just try to create an environment where we recognize that everyone has something to contribute, that we do our very best to listen, to understand, not listen to speak. And that we criticize ideas, but not people. So we try to create just a very supportive and community-driven space here that's based in respect and the understanding that we all, bring something to the table. Just a quick review from last week, and I wasn't here, so it's kind of hard for me to review this. So I'm going to ask you, how did it go last week? What did you learn? Sam, could you review the conversation?
He was awesome.
He was awesome?
He was.
What was awesome about him, Carol?
He was just so full of energy and information, and he really, some people might not have been comfortable with it, but I was okay with a little bit of the chaos. We were all over the place a little bit, but that was more him responding to our questions and stuff.
Okay.
But I thought we had a good session last time.
Okay. So last week was about policy making. So we spent the first session that we did together was about the structure of the legislature. The second week was about how to track bills through the process. The third week was how to advocate, how to make your voice heard, whether that was through public testimony or it's through reaching out to your legislator, et cetera. Then last week was about the policymaking process and how there's still an opportunity to provide input and to bring voice to that. So a couple of things that I think are really important, the factors for success that we're always looking to have both stakeholder and community engagement. I love the fact he brought up we need good data because that's near and dear to my heart. And then that we want to have clear leadership. So that process of policymaking, we're going to get into that a little bit more after session ends. So after we kind of wrap up this series, we may be doing something specifically on policymaking. So if you're interested in that, just kind of keep your eyes open. Any questions from last week or anything that you want to talk about? No? Yeah.
Very quickly, you mentioned the two bills that are up tomorrow. Was it 210 and
209 and 210.
Can you remind me real quick what the subject is of those?
Well, they're both direct democracy bills. I believe 209 is the
209's the,
ID one.
yeah,
It's the need for ID, to ask for ID, and 210
I
is,
think that's the
reading.
read all the,
Okay.
yeah, reading the entire ballot initiative, which Kristin will be talking about, right? Okay, so let me whip through this stuff then. I'm getting, I don't know where I'm pointing. Can you just fast forward? Can you just forward it for me, Rich? Maybe. Okay, we're gonna do that. We'll talk about that later. Okay, so that's it for me. So I'm gonna turn it over to Kristin. Let me tell you who Kristin is and what she's here to talk about. So Kristin Higgins is the lead staff member for the Public Policy Center at the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture, which is like the longest institutional name ever.
Even longer, that's the short version.
That's great. Where she researches and educates the public about emerging policy issues. She oversees the Arkansas Ballot Issue Education Program, which involves producing neutral voter guides, videos, and social media campaigns for voters to better understand what's being asked of them on election day. So she's the source information that we use when we're teaching, like how to vote, or not how to vote, but the process of voting. We always refer to those materials as being the most reliable source and the most friendly source in terms of knowing what a ballot initiative intends to say. She has an undergraduate degree in journalism and a master's in agricultural and extension education from the University of Arkansas, and she's now pursuing a PhD in public policy. And I love the fact that you have in your free time.
Yeah,
in her free time. She's working in her garden and taking care of her kids. So one of the things we're gonna do tonight is I've asked Kristin to kind of give us some background information, some of the nitty gritty on direct democracy, how it's supposed to work. Also talk a little bit about what's changed this year. And then I'm super excited because we're gonna follow that with a panel. And I'm so absolutely thrilled. Steve Grappe from Stand Up Arkansas, who's been involved in everything from CAPES through the education ballot and beyond, totally beyond, is going to talk about his experience in the direct democracy process, along with Shanie Jackson. Shanie is from the Period Poverty Project. And then online, who you can't see right now, we also have Bobby Howard. Bobby, can you say hi?
Hey, everybody. Hello from Fayetteville.
Yeah, so Bobby's in Fayetteville and he's gonna be joining us. We'll actually show you what he looks like when we get to that part. But unless you wanna be the voice from God, would you rather do that, Bobby?
That feels way above my pay grade.
Okay, so you're obviously not in the legislature then. Anyway, he's gonna be talking about his experience both in campaigns as well as kind of where the future of the direct democracy organizing is gonna come from. So with that said, I'm gonna turn it over to Kristin. So please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you. Okay, the clicker working tonight. Yes, awesome. Okay. Hi, everybody. Okay, so this morning I was in front of a couple hundred of 4-H'ers. Who raise your hand if you know what a 4-H kid is or what 4-H is. Okay, great. Sometimes I have to explain it, sometimes not. So I had the lovely duty of welcoming them to the Capitol this morning and trying to talk to them about civic engagement. And considering the world these days, I was like, okay, let me see, what can I talk to teenagers about who can't vote? This is their first time to the Capitol, and just a little bit, trying to make them feel comfortable and welcomed. And I thought that they were intimidating because, teenagers, they all stare at you and, like, they're like, what am I here for? But no, tonight y'all are intimidating because how many of you worked on ballot issue campaigns? Yeah, okay. So I ask that because feel free to jump in along the way when I talk about some of the mechanics, and you all probably know more from your experience than I do standing up here and talking about it. And I really do appreciate those of you who I've talked to on the phone over the past couple of years when we put together our ballot issue voter guide that goes over each of the different proposals. It gives the complete text of the ballot summary, I guess we're calling it now, the ballot summary, and the ballot title, and it answers some frequently asked questions. And it is the only neutral source of information in the state. I like to say that because Ballotpedia, came in and they like upload all their information, and I'm like, I know where you get that Ballotpedia. So the state. But thank you for the introduction. One of the reasons why the Extension Service gets into ballot issue education is this right here. Okay. Oh, there we go. How many of y'all on election day have been voting or standing in line and hearing someone go, do we have things on the ballot? What's on the ballot? Right? Okay. Yeah, I've had that happen too. And I'm standing there going, okay. We can't put these in the, the election centers because unfortunately the state, even though it's neutral, considers it electioneering. So we don't put these inside, but I always tell our extension agents they're all ours, extension agents across the state, we have a yard sign, go ahead, put that information out there so people might be going to vote and can see it and pull it up so that we can avoid the eeny, meeny, miny, mo situation. A lot of y'all who are already familiar with politics or ballot issue education know that we see drop off. We see a lot of people just not vote on the constitutional amendments and the state laws on their ballot. And one of the reasons for that is there's not really party cues along with some of these ballot issues. We were talking earlier about the sales tax on period products and diapers, and what political party is that related to? Not really, you can't just go this one, right? Because there's a lot of different values and issues wrapped up with that one. So when there's not enough information for voters to make a decision, there's not party cues, people will go, well, you know, I know what the status quo is, and I'm just gonna skip over this one. And we see that in Arkansas. So for the past 20 years, we have put out voter guides on all of the ballot issues. And what got us started was there was a proposal to do away with property tax in Arkansas. And until it was removed, until it was like, I think it was struck from the ballot in 2000, until that point, our communities across the state faced the possibility that they would lose property tax for county government, city government, schools, and extension. This is before my time. Thought we should really let people know the impact of what that would mean in their lives. And there wasn't, I don't think, a lot of information going on about that, because usually it's like the most exciting topic, marijuana, right? Or casinos, that gets all the exciting information. But I remember when I first started paying attention to ballot issues in Arkansas, there was a proposal to allow county governments to have the ability to finance energy efficiency projects. That was not exciting. And I found information about it nowhere, except for at Extension. And that was before I even started working there. So we've been around since 2004. And I mentioned we do a neutral information because we are part of the University of Arkansas system, the Division of Agriculture. And we don't take sides. And we try to provide as much neutral information as possible. I talk to the various campaigns ahead of the election, you know, saying, hey, you know what, I have these questions. Can you explain this to me? And then what's unique about our process is we also have the ballot issue groups review it. So we have supporters and opponents review our materials before we publish it, because we want to make sure it is neutral, because we all have our biases. And it's really funny when one word can throw an entire sentence. And I do appreciate supporters and opponents looking at it and flagging things and going, Kristin, I don't think that this says what you think it says. So lots of conversations go on before that goes. So I have a next slide explaining the Division of Agriculture. The people always go, why agriculture? This makes no sense whatsoever. But part of the Division of Agriculture, part of our land grant mission is community and economic development. And what is community development? In my mind, it's voting. It's having residents understand what's being asked of them if they're making a policy decision. It's even knowing that there are policy decisions that they can be involved in. And voting is our number one type of civic engagement that we can participate in. So that is my justification when I go out there. So I mentioned we're part of the land grant university system. Raise your hand if you know what land grant means. Okay, so thank you. In the 1860s, I'm full of history trivia tonight. In 1860, Congress passed the Morrill Act and created land grant universities. And we were able to, in all of the states, create a land grant university. And along with those land grant universities, which in Arkansas is the U of A and then UAPB, there's an extension associated with it. And extensions are educators like me who go out into the community and take that information from the research side and share with community members. So we're a little unique in Arkansas that we're here in Little Rock, whereas most states, their land grant universities and their extension services are on those university campuses. So we're not on the Fayetteville campus, but we're like cousins. We work together. And then we're in every county, which is why this program is awesome. I love it. So we have extension offices, all 75 counties, and they all get these. So we distributed about 50,000 copies this last election, and then we have them online. So I share all of that with you to kind of explain why the Division of Agriculture is involved in this and why I'm involved in this. And thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate it. And one of the things I like to share with people is that I was a newspaper reporter for 10 years. until I couldn't take it anymore because I had to sit there on my hands and not talk. And that was really hard, attending all those public meetings and hearing whatever lawmaker say something and you're like, that's not right. That's not right. No, that's right. Or I have the answer to that question. I am that person. My professors have a hard time keeping me quiet and I have to sit there going, okay, let someone else have a turn. Let's not be that person. Let someone else have a turn. So I've been in a lot of different types of community meetings, from levy district meetings to quorum court meetings to planning commission meetings, so all kinds of things. And it's really great when we talk about ballot issues because a lot of those different levels of government end up being affected by these types of policy decisions. So y'all have the opportunity tonight to ask questions. Stop me at any time. Be that person. Feel free to raise your hand. Yes.
Where can I get my hands on one?
Well, this is an old one. So in 2026, this will be in every county extension office. So here in Pulaski County, it's over by the health department and the Pulaski County Jail. That's where our extension office is in Little Rock. Or you can go to our website and get it from there. And if you want to look at it, feel free. This QR code will take you to our website.
Thank you.
Health department.
On Roosevelt? Yes. So that's where our county extension office is.
Next to the juvenile court.
Health department and the jail and yeah, I'm trying to remember what else. Yes, over there. And so that's where you can go get your soil tested. If you want to get your soil tested ahead of gardening, just drop it off there. It's free.
It's on Roosevelt.
Yes. Okay, so I welcome your questions and your expertise because I know that you all have done a lot of this already. I wasn't sure who was going to be here tonight, and so I prepared like some mechanics and in the weeds of the ballot issue process because oftentimes I suffer from information-titis where I go, oh yeah, I know this, but I forget other people don't. So I've got some of these basics, and I mentioned history trivia. Why we even have ballot issues goes back to our state constitution. In 1874, we passed our is it fourth or fifth? Fifth constitution, thank you. And it was during, obviously, a time after the Civil War, during a period of Reconstruction ending, and there was a lot of tribalness between different political factions. We had the Brooks-Baxter War where they couldn't agree who was the state governor and troops were involved. And so it was quite a mess. And so the state constitution was passed and it was set up in a way that was distrustful of government. And so that's why it's called the thou shalt not constitution. So it was very limiting to what the state could do, to what local government could do. And so we have that in 1874. We haven't had a new constitution since then. There have been efforts to pass a new statewide constitution that would update it or modernize it. So the only way to change that document from 1874 is through the ballot issue process. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And again, I just feel like so many of y'all already know this, so I hope this is new information to some of y'all. I did this slide in November, so I can't remember if it's 102 or 103. I need to update this. But so it's been amended over 100 times since 1874. And again, that's the only way to change what is in that document. So this is the guiding force for the citizen initiative process. And a lot of people are surprised to find out that it was actually passed in 1910, but it didn't really go into effect until the 1920s after there was a long lawsuit court decision and the courts came through and said, oh yeah, no, that amendment did pass. And so everything that's been passed since then is good. Because originally they tried to say that it wasn't in effect. And so there was like this decade-long fight over was the citizen initiative process actually in effect or not. So we've had this process for over 100 years now, where citizens in Arkansas can participate in the referral of policy decisions to voters in addition to the legislature. So before this amendment, It was only coming from the legislature. And so since then, we've had citizen involvement.
Question.
Yes.
1910, was that kind of a radical idea or was that standard practice? Like,
Well, check out this map. Yeah, check out this map. So it started out west and kind of came east.
Okay.
To have the citizen initiative process. And it was during a time of populism. It was during a time of, hey, we don't feel that the legislatures are listening to us. And so we want to have a say. We want to have a voice. William Jennings Bryan was involved. There was a big campaign. And interestingly, the governor at the time was also supportive of it. Governor, I think. Thank you. I was like, I know, I've been to the building with that governor's name on it.
And he, by the way, he built the state capitol, but he and Brian were good friends.
Right, so there was a lot of, it was interesting because the governor was in support of it, but it was at a time when there was a lot of distrust of the government, or at least from the legislative side of our voices aren't being heard and we want to take this model that's being adopted by the West and use it here. But as you can see, interestingly, where does it stop? Right, so there are more states that have a ballot issue process where the citizens can be involved. But Arkansas is one of 15 where citizens can refer constitutional amendments, state laws, and referendums. So for example, Florida has a citizen initiative process, but it's not all of those three. So we are the only ones in the Southeast that have all three methods of direct democracy from the citizen perspective. And I always like to point that out because I find that fascinating that we're somewhat unique in that. Did you have questions? Yeah?
I'm just counting.
Oh, okay, so 15. I've counted this many times. But there's over like 20 something states that have the citizen initiative process, but then again, they're all a little different. Our website does have a comparative analysis about these differences, and we're going to update it after this session. So for example, in Michigan, our cousin state, Michigan has where the legislature can take your citizen proposal and adopt it, or they can put it on the ballot. So it doesn't always have to go on the ballot. The legislature there can just go, yeah, okay, great idea. We'll pass it and we'll adopt it. So it can be a little different in each state. Okay, so going to the basics, when we talk about ballot issues, I always have to go, okay, I know this, but maybe not everybody knows this. So we have the constitutional amendments, which amend that document from 1874, and that is state policy, right? So these policy decisions, it might not be fleshed out. It might say, we're gonna have this agency come up with the rules. So it's the overall arching policy. And then we have the state laws that citizens can propose. The legislature cannot, because they already do that. They're, up there right now doing that. But so the citizens can propose state laws too. And those are more specific. Like this will happen, or this can happen, it fleshes out some of those details because whoever does the sponsorship wants to have that information in writing. So a constitutional amendment, it can text, it can remove text, it can create policy, it can get rid of policy or change policy. The state laws, the legislature can change a state law that the citizens initiated and approved. So it takes a 2/3 vote in the legislature and they can change the state law. But they cannot change the constitutional amendment unless it's written in the amendment that the legislature has this authority. Big caveat though, there is a disagreement over that. And we recently saw the Attorney General say, if you do the plain reading of the Constitution, the legislature can change a citizen initiative without another vote of the people. Because right now, if you get something on the ballot and it passes and it doesn't give the legislature authority to make changes, the only way to change that is to go back through the initiative or through the ballot process, which is why we saw the casino come back, the casino issue, because they wanted to make changes to that. And the legislature couldn't just go, sure, yeah, we'll change that. had to go back on the ballot. So theoretically, constitutional amendments should not be changed unless it gives permission. Big caveat, we'll see what happens after the AG's opinion out there, because that overturns some precedents. And then referendums, we rarely have that, but it is open to Arkansans. That's where the legislature passes a law and a group can go around and collect signatures to put that law on the ballot. And if you vote for, you're voting to keep that law. If you vote against, you're voting to get rid of that law. So I sometimes will say veto referendum until my boss kicks me in the butt and says, Kristin, it's not really a veto referendum because for means this and against means this. But we don't often see that happen. There was with the Arkansas Learns, there was an attempt to do that. And then a tax on soda back in the 90s, there was an attempt to get rid of that, which interestingly, I think there was a bill filed to get rid of that. So we're doing, it just took us 15 years to get there. Wait, that's 30 years ago, isn't it? Okay, so types of ballot issue elections in Arkansas. I do not want to overlook that Arkansas also has local ballot issues. Citizens can propose local ballot issues. They can propose or they can propose referendums. So the same people who did the casino issue were involved, interestingly, in a referendum to undo a zoning decision because they went around and collected enough signatures to put that on the ballot and undid a planning board commission decision that was approved by the city council. So you can do local level changes to ordinances at the city level and the county level, although we're mostly familiar with the wet-dry elections. There's a petition process for that. Library funding, there's a petition to get rid of library funding. Advertising and Promotion Commission, hamburger tax, hotel tax, that's a new election that was just established in 2023, that if a community wants to do that, they have to put it on the ballot now. So that would come from the local government, but if you didn't like that outcome, the voters could also do a petition. So then we've got our state, which I already went over. We also have bond issues, right? So if the state wants to do a bond issue, they have to have some voter approval. So I think 2011 was the last time that there was something like that. Okay, so something that most of you are familiar with, the process. I mentioned the citizen initiative process and the legislative process, and there are two different processes to put what is on the ballot for you to decide. And I'll try to go over it quickly. And Gail, please just tell me when I'm close. So right now, the legislature is reviewing proposals for the 2026 ballot. So in the odd number years, they can file up until February 12th was the deadline, and they filed 43 different proposals for the 2026 ballot. Some of them are similar. Some of them are shell bills. Who knows what a shell bill is? Tell me.
They just throw an idea out there and they'll put the details in.
Right, exactly. So they wanted to meet that February 12th deadline. So they just, hey, I got this. So in case later they can come back and flesh it out some more, although typically they just fall off, but it still counts. So there's 43 proposals from the House and Senate combined, and each side has a committee process that they go through to whittle down their numbers. The Constitution allows them to refer 3. They can do one more if it involves their salary, but voters a couple of years ago passed something setting up their salary, so we'll probably not see one of those again. So 3 constitutional amendments. And some years the House will do 2 and the Senate will do 1. Some years the Senate will do 2 and the House will do 1. Historically they alternated, but now they're even saying, hey, we don't even want to do 1. This last year when we had just the 1 from the legislature, that was the first time in 40 years that we saw only 1 come from them. So we have this process. You can read them all online, or you can go to my website. That's something I can pass around in just a moment. Our website lists all of the ones that have been filed. Some of them have companion bills. So that means someone in the House and the Senate filed the same exact bill. And those are how you know, okay, this issue has more traction than the Shell bill. Or if you look and see how many sponsors or co-sponsors, the more co-sponsors there are, the more popular that issue is. And, you know, I don't have a special, let me just call up this person and ask, okay, so what's the House gonna refer this year? I, like you, I'm looking at these bills going, okay, so there's like 20 co-sponsors on this. This looks very promising. Or for example, there's a proposal to allow judges to run as a partisan. So they can say, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm an independent. There's been a lot of support for that. So I go, okay, I know that this has been one that's been talked about, that's really popular. So I, you know, well, maybe this will be one of them. But so they're going through committee right now. The House just met on Monday to go through, to start going through their I can't remember if they were 20 and the other was 23, but so 43 total. So they're going through theirs. And what they said, what the chair said was, we're gonna go over them over the 3 Mondays, and we're gonna hear them all, and then we're gonna rank them. They're kind of ranked choice voting, the proposals. And whichever ones get like the most points, then they'll have like top 5, and then they'll go back through them and like come up with one. And then the Senate will do pretty much the same thing, although I don't think that they've started. So it takes, they have to pass in both the House and Senate committee, just like a regular bill. They have to go from one side to the other. And then majority votes. There's not any legal review of the ballot title like there is for the citizen initiative process. So the Attorney General doesn't go over it and go, okay, this. No, it's just what's deemed, or what the Supreme Court has said is that it's coming from the legislature. So we pretty much say it's constitutional because it's coming from your representatives.
Seems.
So then we have the citizen side, and at the moment, so you have to, you hear all these out-of-state interests. Well, it's someone in Arkansas who's filed the legislation. So you have to be an Arkansan to file with the Attorney General's office your ballot title proposal. You can file it anytime. So some states have specific deadlines of when you can file. Arkansas does not have and when I say file, I mean, I can file in January, I can file in April, I can file in November, like there's not a deadline. Yes, you had your hand up.
So now we're gonna say it has to be in the same
Yes.
election.
So there is I think it's passed, right? Yeah, so there was a bill that was passed that now does put more of a time frame on it, but I will say that I have not really seen, okay, someone filed a 26 for the 2020 ballot. It just didn't, oh, did you?
Or our kids had to refile last week
Yeah,
because we filed before the election.
right, but that's because of the new law. That's because of the new law, right? Yeah, but I mean, like before that, you didn't really see someone file years ahead. But that was, some other states do have very concrete deadlines. But yeah, so there is that. The Attorney General has to certify the ballot title as being free from misleading or partisan language.
You did such a great job with the casino one.
Yeah, and that is up to the Attorney General, right? So the Attorney General gets to decide. And as ballot issue groups know, if they don't like it, then they try again, or they have to go through the court system, and it can become a lengthy process. There are some changes in session that would have the Attorney General now decide whether it's constitutional under the US Constitution. That's new. I'm not really sure the impact of that yet. So I'd like to hear from the ballot groups, when you have some experience.
It's a ridiculous thing, because they always would have had to do that, because we can't have a law that isn't constitutional with the US Constitution.
But the Attorney General is on the executive branch. She doesn't have power to be the judiciary.
Right, so how that works with the federal court system, we have yet to see.
Yeah, it doesn't even carry weight in the state court system. The Supreme Court has said what the Attorney General's opinion
Right,
is.
but that's an opinion, that's an opinion.
Yeah.
So we will see the impact, whether it makes a big deal, whether it doesn't, but it is an interesting change. And it's like, no one really knows yet the impact of that. And then we have lots of rules for the people who collect the signatures, who are called canvassers. They have to be Arkansas citizens, there's law enforcement background checks, they have to be paid by the hour. Must witness the signature, you can't just leave a petition out for people to sign, although I have seen some wet, dry people do that before at the liquor store. And I'm like, okay.
So that's what those ladies were. They weren't at the.
And then they have to do a lot of petition signing. So y'all are, I'm sure most of y'all are very aware of what goes on with the petition. A lot of these rules have come over the past 10 years. Before marijuana, before minimum wage, there weren't as many canvassing rules, and that's changed every legislative cycle. We've seen new rules put into place. So a sponsor, as soon as you spend or raise $500, you're supposed to register with the Arkansas Ethics Commission, even if you're a local ballot issue group, which many of them forget or don't know that they're required to do that. And so we're seeing a lot of these canvasser rules now being applied at the local level in this last session. So if you're involved in local ballot issue campaigns, be aware that there have been some changes for the canvassers as well. And then, of course, the signature collection process itself, to gather them from at least 50 counties, which is an increase. It used to be 15, and I don't think that lawsuit ever finished.
It's still sitting there.
It's still sitting there. I look every couple of months. Now, there was a lawsuit challenging that because the Constitution says at least 15, and there was an argument over, is that a floor, a ceiling, where are we? And so they have to collect in at least 50 counties to get something on the ballot. And then there, of course, there's a certain number associated with the constitutional amendment. A constitutional amendment, there's a higher number required than a state law, and then a referendum. And then it has to survive all the lawsuits. So I just put that in there as a placeholder for later. So these are the numbers of signatures that are needed for 2026, and it was also 2024. And it's based on the number of people who voted for governor in the last election. And that's when you look and see the ballot issue election results, and you see there's a lot of drop off between the number of people who vote for governor and the number of people who vote on the ballot issues. Gail, how much time do I have?
We've got 12 minutes.
Okay. And so in each of those 50 counties, you also have to have a certain number of signatures representing 5% of the number of people. So you have a county threshold and a statewide threshold. And so you can see why it takes a lot of time, energy, and effort to keep all these rules together, make sure you've got all the I's dotted, T's crossed, and we saw some campaigns that are thwarted by some of these rules. So who writes the ballot titles? I get asked this a lot. From the legislature, it's usually not the sponsor. It's usually the Bureau of Legislative Research. They might have gone to the Bureau of Legislative Research. That's their staff, right? That's the staff that helps write the bills and keep track of all the changes. And so usually they'll say, hey, I've got this idea. Can you write this up for me? Or, they've seen it somewhere else, or someone has given it to them. And they go, hey, here, take this, put Arkansas in it. So on the citizen side, there's ballot issue groups, right? So the members, I'm sure you can hear from them later, they'll either write it, or they too might look to other states to see how things have been done in other states. It could be a supporter of that cause that also might go, hey, this might be good for you. Or an attorney, because it's very legalese. There's a lot of legal language that's included in it because of Supreme Court opinions over the years that have said, oh no, this has to be in the ballot title. This has to be in the ballot title. This has to be in the ballot title. And so what you see on election day is just the title, not the full law. And one of the bills that has been going through committee is a proposal to put those ballot titles on the Secretary of State's website, whether they come from the citizen initiatives process or from the legislature, for you to go and be able to read, because right now they don't have them up there. Right now, our website, not Ballotpedia, our website has all of them. We have all the citizen initiative proposals. We track those, and we have all the ones from the legislature. And we, I was sitting in the committee and they're like, Clark Tucker was like, nobody, this doesn't exist anywhere. And I'm like, it's on my website. But I would love for the Secretary of State's office to have that information on their website, because that is their role, like for voter education. That's where you should be able to go and see what's circulating and what's not. And because they weren't doing that, that's when I started doing that.
Question.
Mhm.
Why aren't they doing it?
Because they are not required. That is the answer I was given.
Press,
And what?
and they won't do a press.
Well, I mean,
They are not legally required.
but it looks like that's gonna pass. I mean.
I'm hoping it passes. I would love to have that out there, because I had to do a lot of homework myself, calling groups or calling the Attorney General's office and saying, can you send that to me? They don't have, well, I guess I could FY it, but that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, so they're not required to, and so they don't. At one point, they started, like one election year, they started putting it on there, and then they pulled them and they said, oh, our attorney said we're not legally required to do it. So they told us to take it down. So. Okay, so limitations on ballot titles. From the legislature, the only limitation on the ballot title is that it can only be one topic. If you have more than one topic, it's called log rolling. And we saw the Supreme Court in 2018 kick off an amendment that they said dealt with more than one issue. Colloquially, we call that tort reform, or changes to the laws involving lawsuit damages. So they took that off in 2018. When it comes to the citizen group, I already mentioned that it can't be misleading or partisan. So the abortion amendment, that was what originally the Arkansas Reproductive Health Amendment, and they said, oh, that's partisan. You gotta change it to abortion. And it too can only be one topic.
Yeah.
There's no word limit on ballot titles, but the Attorney General's opinions have said, hey, when you start getting them really long, there can be errors and challenges, and you might lose in court. And so they can't be too long, but there's not a definition of how long too long is. Just don't, once you get past 1,200 words, it's a bad idea. So they also, a for vote has to mean you're for it, and against vote means you have to be against it. And that's part of their misleading definition. Okay, so after an election, I already mentioned that the legislature can go through and change a state law that citizens initiated. And then there's a disagreement over whether the legislature can change a constitutional amendment. Or the legislature can refer changes back to the people. And we have seen that. So this session, some of those 43 bills, about maybe 6 or 7 are changes to constitutional amendments that voters have approved in the past. And I mean, some of them are old, but it still counts, right? I mentioned the judge partisanship one, that was from 2000. So some of those are already approved and they want to change them. So we're going through the process. If you're a citizen group, you have to do a whole new campaign. Yeah, so did you know that these appear at the end of the ballot, which is another reason why we see people stop and not vote? They're just tired, right? Legally, you have 10 minutes in the voting booth to cast your ballot. It used to be 3, and then it was 5, and now it's 10. So that's a good change that's happened over the past decade. So you have 10 minutes to decide. They appear at the end, and again, I mentioned you see just the popular name, which is that short description, like the Arkansas Abortion Amendment, and then the ballot title, however long that is. Legislative issues go first, and then citizen referred constitutional amendments, and then state laws, and then referendums. So your ballot, like, if you've ever wondered, there's an order for that. Okay, so recent changes, I'll go over this kind of quickly. So this is all happening in the past couple of weeks. This happened in the last couple of sessions. So how many of y'all remember when the Secretary of State was in charge for 2 election cycles? So there was a change in who reviewed the ballot titles, and then they changed it back after the court said that was unconstitutional. So that's happened over the past decade. The Attorney General resumed authority in 2023. So they look over the ballot title at the beginning of the process. And then the new signature requirement I mentioned earlier from 15 counties to 50. So these are some recent changes. This session, what we're seeing is, so this is what's already passed, and I did this yesterday, so something might have passed since then. But so what is passed, a canvasser has to tell a voter before you sign that petition fraud is a crime. What's changed is, we mentioned earlier, the time frame, the deadline of when ballot titles are good. Before that, you could have filed in 2020 for the 2024 election. Theoretically, most people don't do that, but you could have. And your signatures over those years could have still been valid. But now there's a law saying the signatures are only valid until that general election. And then after that election, they're not valid anymore. Yes.
And while this is important, there was talk within grassroots organizations of doing a recreational marijuana amendment of 2028. Give that enough time to educate, and they put an end to that.
Yeah, so not just the voter signatures, but the ballot titles now. So the ballot titles expire now after an election. You have to resubmit and go back through that same process again. I mentioned the Attorney General has to decide whether it's constitutional under federal law. And then this one, I'm still trying to figure out the impact of citizens can't submit more than one ballot title that is similar. And let me explain why this is important. So we had the FOI amendments or government transparency. And then we had, was it the education? I'm trying to remember what the other group was. We had two different groups submit ballot titles, and they submitted numerous versions because they didn't know what the Attorney General wanted or what the Attorney General would approve.
Not education.
So they submitted like 4 at a time. And so now they can't do that under this law. But I'm not sure yet the impact of, well, does that mean if this gets rejected, they can come back and submit another one, or is that one, is it done?
Should be able to, it just cuts back our time, so that was like a time saving way of doing it, and now we just have to go through the process.
Yeah, and I think it was the
However long
paper
they
ballot
take.
people that did multiple.
They did it, well, I mean, they only did it once, and then they didn't come back. They went county.
I only heard.
They sued all the way to the Supreme Court.
Right, but that was through the county. Well, I mean, yes, they did, but then they said, hey, just approve it without reviewing it. We don't need to go through this process. And then they went through the county level. Okay.
And the counties threw them out.
And so laws under discussion, and again, some of this might have already passed since yesterday, the photo ID. So if you want to sign a petition as an Arkansas voter, you now have to show, or if it passes, which it probably will. It's tomorrow,
It's still in
probably
committee.
will, it's still in committee. You will have to show your government issued voter or photo ID to sign the petition. But apparently also the state announced this week that you can now have mobile IDs on your phone. So, and I did check with the Secretary of State's office, and they said that would count toward the ID requirement. So the Secretary of State, it's proposed that for them to reject all signatures from a single canvasser if the Secretary of State thinks that they violated laws.
Thanks.
Thanks. That's right.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Voters must read the ballot title. Did that pass?
No, not yet.
Okay,
That's
thank
on
you.
following committee too.
So there's not really, okay, so the ID, it's a felony for the canvasser if they don't look at your ID. It's a misdemeanor if they don't show you the ballot title to read, or that you might be able to read to them. One thing about this that I'm uncertain is there's not a trigger point in this proposal for when the ballot title must be read. So is it, hey, you just want me to read it? Okay. Or is it, you don't have the best ability to read and I'll read it out loud for you. So I'm not sure yet how ballot issue groups are gonna tackle
No, we
this.
have to read it every time.
Well,
No.
yes,
No, they
read it. Yeah,
Either the person signing has to read it
Yeah.
or the.
but there's not a trigger of when you have to read it.
But as far as them reading it, does that mean like, if I watch their eyes scan the ballot
There's not a
title,
definition
does
of
that
reading.
count, or do they have to read it out loud to me to explain
No,
that I understand that they read it?
yeah, there's not enough information. I'm not sure what the ballot issue groups
Well,
are gonna
and
do.
to be honest with you, there's not a lot of.
I'm online and I have a question.
Go ahead.
Sorry, maybe you guys said this and I couldn't hear, but is this the short title or like the full title?
This is the ballot title that comes under the popular name. So for example, let's say again, the abortion amendment, the popular name was the Arkansas Abortion Amendment of 2024. And then there was a longer title. And that is the summary that they refer to in this law. That is not the actual full law that is in the proposal submitted to the Attorney General's office.
Same thing that appears on the ballot.
Right, so it's what shows up on the ballot.
Great.
And just going back to the reading piece of it, it's like there hasn't been a lot of discussion because I think right now, we don't want them to think about it too much. You know, we'd rather like just fight it on the basis of we shouldn't have to read this, but we don't want to get into too much detail because there are some things that maybe could mitigate the impact of it, you know, on a bigger basis.
So we're all gonna learn together, apparently. And then there's a proposal for the canvasser must submit a signed statement saying they complied with all the laws, and the Secretary of State won't count the signatures without that document, which is similar to another document also submitted. But then this one is, there's multiple documents involved, so. And then there's something called the document validity division. This one has paused in committee. It hasn't made it through committee. This would have the Secretary of State's office have a law enforcement division that would investigate claims of fraud related to the initiative process. But it has failed in committee. But I still put it on here because, you know, it's still floating around.
They can bring that back, right? Don't they have, like if it fails
Yes.
the committee?
Yes,
yeah.
it can come back, yeah, or they can, I don't know if they can refile it,
They
something
didn't give
different.
him
Well,
any
they-
indication of what it would take to pass it, though, so I don't think.
So I was gonna use this
he's saying-
for if we had a lot of people here who weren't familiar with the ballot issue process, but I think a lot of you are. I was just gonna go over like what we saw with the abortion amendment and how the Supreme Court has a role in the ballot issue process. They're the court entity, they have the jurisdiction for hearing challenges to ballot issues, titles, to signatures, because they're in control of the state constitution, right? So you don't just go straight to federal government, you go through the state Supreme Court.
And just as a side note to that, that's next time's session, right? So next, 2 weeks from now when we meet, we're very specifically talking about the judicial process. So-
Great. So in Arkansas, most of the challenges, the legal challenges to ballot issues happen before the election. And that's because they're challenging whether an election should even take place. In other states, we'll see lots of challenges after something has passed because they're challenging the constitutionality or the validity of that issue itself. But in Arkansas, we tend to be ahead of elections, although we do have a couple of ballot issues that were later tossed. So the measure to limit adoption and foster care to family, to married couples of opposite sex, that was thrown out, even though it passed, voters passed it. But the court, Arkansas courts rejected it. And then Arkansas courts and the Supreme Court rejected in the 90s, there was a term limit proposal that limited Congress. And the US Supreme Court said, you can't do that at the state level. So those are two examples where those challenges happened after something passed.
We tried to limit the US Congress.
Yes, our Congress.
Blanket.
Yeah, it was state and Congress and federal. And the courts ruled, no, you can only control the state level. You cannot say your representatives in DC can only serve for so long. But we weren't the only ones. That was going around a couple different states at that time. Okay, so are we done? Okay.
Can I ask one question, because it doesn't seem like we answered, and I don't even know this answer, and I've looked for it. In the ballot initiative and referendum section, it also gives citizens the right to recall. elected officials except for in certain situations. You know what, I mean, I know it's municipal, but no higher than municipal.
Correct, so you cannot do constitutional officers, so like governor, lieutenant governor, although there's a proposal, that's one of the 43 filed to do that. JPs are 2-year terms, so that's, and they're also in the Constitution, so no, it depends on the level of government or the class of city. So for example, in Little Rock, there have been petitions to recall city directors. I don't know, I can't remember if you could do the mayor in Little Rock. So there's little differences between cities
Because
across
they did the mayor in over in
Right.
Cross County, and they're
Right.
looking at some other stuff.
Yeah, so right now it's more at that local
So
level.
it's a confusing.
So like, for example, you can't recall your school board, you can't recall your planning board, like, so, yeah. Okay, we do have a monthly newsletter that I would love for you all to sign up for. It's all about ballot issues, about what's happening in the state. We're on Facebook, Instagram, please guys, there's my phone number, there's my email address, please, reach out. And then also we have our blog posts are on our website, where you can find all 43 amendment links, and then where you can find everything that's been submitted by citizen initiative groups. So thank you all so much.
You're welcome, you're welcome. Can you flip it over so we can see Bobby on there? Possibly, okay, so we're gonna move on to the panel portion of it, and so Kristin is also gonna be available to jump in on that as well. That's close, we want the Zoom link, if we can get there we go, so Bobby's up there. So I was gonna ask you guys to sit up here, would that be all right? Shanie and Steve, are you cool with that? Bobby. Where I'm looking.
Seeing my big face makes me feel so powerful.
I told you, you're gonna feel like the Wizard of Oz at the very beginning.
Down to me up there.
Yeah, come on up. So let me just introduce everybody to you if I could. First of all, this is Steve Grappe, who has been part of our trainings the whole entire time. And so we're super happy that he's here. Steve is kind of a big part of how I ended up in Arkansas, because we met during the election cycle, 2022, when Steve was in charge of the World Caucus. And after that, of course, he was one of the drivers and the vision toward the referendum on the LEARNS Act. So he was involved with CAPES during that whole process. After the CAPES program, he then moved on to be part of the educational petition process, the educational ballot initiative in this last cycle. And today he is the founder and chief cook and bottle washer of the Stand Up Arkansas, so a grassroots organizer, and really involved, especially now in rural organizing, community organizing, and sustainability, right?
Yes, I'll also add that I was in this last one, even though it had to be a secret while we were doing it, I was also in charge of hiring organizers for the abortion and for the transparency, and we helped Shanie.
Yes.
So we've been involved in most of them over the last few years.
Yeah. Thanks, thank you. Then right here next to me is Shanie Jackson, who is an Arkansas native, so are you, right? And a student at ASU Jonesboro, studying criminology. Yeah, and social work. And she was the gold awardee of the 2023 Presidential Volunteer Service Award. She's a leader in the Arkansas Period Poverty Project. So any of you who were involved with the pink petitions, that was Shanie's baby throughout the entire cycle. And she works with other groups as well, including climate change, reproductive rights, and she, as I mentioned, led the petition drive that would remove sales and use taxes on menstrual products and diapers from 2024, and is still really involved in the process. And then on the screen behind Kristin's head, we have Bobby Howard. Bobby is the executive director of Arkansas Appleseed, which is a public policy advocacy, development, and communications and organizational performance organization. Also a lifelong Arkansan. Bobby received his PhD in philosophy from the University of Arkansas Fulbright College. He conducted multidisciplinary research in the philosophy of religion, which is really helpful now, I'm sure, as well as political philosophy, cognitive science, and human rights theory. So he approaches everything as an educator and has a lot of teaching experience and believes in the power of education. We're kindred spirits in that regard. So I thank you all for being here. And Kristin, you've already met. And what I wanted to do is just kind of talk, I'm gonna move over here, talk a little bit just about what your experience is. We've learned this, like Kristin did such an amazing job explaining to us how the structure of the system, how it's supposed to work. And now it's like, what really works, what really doesn't work. And so I wanted to start by asking you, what's the major one thing you learned during the last ballot cycle? So heading into the 2024 election, what's your big takeaway? What did you learn from that process? You want to start, Steve?
Money rules,
Okay.
money rules.
Do you want to expand on that or talk on that?
I think that in Arkansas, traditionally, we have not got a big history of pure grassroots organizations doing referendums or doing a lot of the amendments. There's a lot, generally there's money behind, not always. But with most of what was happening in this last election, there was a lot of money thrown around, like upwards of $5 to $7 million just in the ballot initial process. And then I primarily worked on the For Our Kids education, and it was 100% grassroots. We did not go after out-of-state money. We didn't get big special interest money. We raised small dollar donations, but there was a BQC, a ballot question committee, that was formed as an we had several of them that were anti-ballot teams. And there was like $2 million spent to defeat and to keep the education amendment from getting on the ballot. And I don't think that's right. I think that I don't think it's right for grassroots citizens to be working on an amendment and you have big dollar political sitting in office people spending millions of dollars to defeat.
Thanks.
Money rules.
Thanks, Steve. Shanie, you got anything to add or anything different?
I mean, I definitely agree with the money. For me, I had to know people. I couldn't get it off the ground. I didn't have the reach. Probably until David Couch was the lawyer that represented us, and he had mentioned Steve, and we happened to meet at the marijuana convention where I was set up with my like 9-month pregnant sister helping me. So she was just like, what? But yeah, so we finally met and got connected. And then that just opened the door to like these people. And that was I had to know people
We
to
were
get
close.
it going.
I mean,
I don't think I wouldn't have gotten as far as I did. That's certainly true. But yeah, I think you need to know people.
Bobby, you got anything to add?
Oh, I always have things to add, Gail. You know this. I think I would echo what the others have said about how expensive direct democracy has become in Arkansas. And I would just add, well, a couple of things. The first thing, it's just kind of heartbreaking to read the language in the state constitution that reserves legislative powers to the people, because that was just so obviously a populist move, right? That was just so obviously the people of Arkansas demanding a seat at the table. And then over the years, it's just become more and more and more expensive to take that seat at the table. And it's become more and more difficult to meet the signature thresholds in all of the 50 counties. And it's really heartbreaking to kind of read the original spirit of our referendum and amendment process, and then to see how it's changed over time. And then I think, the other thing I would add is as this legislative session has unfolded, I don't know if I had any big takeaways from the campaign cycle last go around with regard to the amendments, because I already knew it's real damn hard to get these things done. But as the legislative session unfolds, I think my biggest takeaway is some of y'all got real close, and it really scared some of these policymakers down in Little Rock. And they don't have to abolish the direct democracy provisions in the state constitution to make direct democracy out of reach for the people of Arkansas. All they have to do is make it just a little bit harder every 2 years, right? And that's what we've seen, whether that's the intention or not from the policymakers, they've made it consistently harder for Arkansans to put laws on the ballot for a vote every 2 years for the last 15 years. And the result of that is fewer and fewer or none truly citizen-led grassroots initiatives are on the ballot in November. And that's just really sad, given our state's really cool populist history.
So Kristin, I'm curious, because of your historical perspective on the ballot initiative process, have you noticed that? Have you seen like a shift in the types of ballot initiatives over time, especially say in the last 10 to 15 years?
I would say that you tend to see a lot of repeated type of proposals. I mean, when you look at casinos and you go back into history, we're talking back to like the 1950s, the 1940s, so they come again and again and again and again. So there's that, not necessarily that shift, but you see that the one time something might be there, it can come back. So that it's not one and done all the time. And so I wanted to say that for my big takeaway was there's a lot of passion for this process in Arkansas. And it was really good to see that passion, regardless of which proposal it was, to see that there are people who really want this to work.
Thank you. Do you guys have any questions off the top of your head? Yeah, Stan.
I was fascinated to learn that the legislature can pass things to be put on a ballot initiative. And it makes sense for an amendment. But can you discuss what the rationale would be? Why wouldn't they just pass a bill as opposed to getting something on the ballot?
I don't know that they've ever just put a law on the ballot to vote. I think there's a couple of reasons you have to, like tort reform or.
The ones that I would say the ones that they've done are sales tax.
Yeah.
So they'll put a sales tax proposal on the ballot because the voters in Arkansas have to approve a state sales tax or a bond issue. But when it comes to their 43 proposals, those are all to change the state constitution. So the only way to change that is through this process. So for example, the recall proposal, they want to add that text to the Constitution. The slavery issue, they want to remove a portion of language in the state constitution. And the only way to do that is through that process.
And I'm not sure if y'all know this, but slavery is still legal in the Arkansas Constitution. So. What?
Yes.
Can I follow up with that?
If you're incarcerated, they can legally put you into slavery.
And they do.
Say that again, Steve, what did you just say?
In cases of incarceration, slavery is legal.
Well, that's national.
I know.
That's in the federal constitution.
It's
That's
also
the
it's
13th
in the
Amendment.
state.
It's in the state.
But Arkansas is particularly bad because we're one of the few that doesn't have a minimum wage. Now, minimum wage for prisoners in other states is, 3 cents, 10 cents, whatever. But here there is none, so we can actually be fully unpaid slavery.
And we're the only state like that, correct?
Sorry.
We're the only state like that.
I don't know if we're the only, but I can't remember.
I think they said in the legislative session the other day that we're like one of 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Mississippi's got that too.
Yeah.
Well, Mississippi just tried to make it where if you're an illegal immigrant, you will be put into life without parole.
Oh, God. Well, I think we're not trespassing, which means that anybody ever asks you for your ID. Yeah.
Wait, back up, what'd you say?
In
Mississippi's trying to pass a law that says if you're an illegal immigrant on property in Mississippi that you go to prison for life without parole and you can be enslaved. And the only person that can release you is the governor.
And since we're talking about Mississippi, they no longer have a working citizen initiative process because their state constitution says that you have to collect signatures from 5 congressional districts, and they no longer have 5. And so the state Supreme Court said, well, then we don't have an initiative process until that's changed. Just a sign.
Yes, just a little cheerful note. Carol, do you have a question?
No, I'm having heart failure.
Can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
So one thing for everybody to know, the referendum process is something that doesn't happen a lot. And the LEARNS Act, which is unconstitutional in my opinion, it's oppressive to our people. It takes money out of public schools, but there's all kinds of things that we think is wrong with the LEARNS Act. But when we decided to run a referendum, we went to try to find somebody to help us write it. We're just citizens, we're not attorneys. And we went to every attorney's office we could find, and everyone said no. Because an attorney did not want to put his name on something that was the governor's key legislation for fear of reprisal. So we as citizens wrote that referendum with no legal background. And it took us like 4 times going to the Attorney General. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know the legalese. And to make that even worse, they made us define in the short title every section of the 144-page omnibus bill. So our short title was 16 pages long, which is what they're saying now we would have to read out loud to every person. And I say all that is the legislature is the ones that's making this tough on us. This process was not meant to be this way. And when we got less than 900 signatures from putting the LEARNS Act on the ballot, it's scary. Because they've got a 122-page access bill right now that's the same thing, and they're already pre-making it where we can't run a referendum against it. They knew that we were coming. So as citizens, we have got to make a decision if we want to keep this process or not. And if we are going to work this process, we got to come up with some systems that jump through all the hoops that they're putting in.
One of the things too that we didn't talk about yet that I think is important for us to consider is that when we're talking about referendums specifically, normally when a bill is passed, it goes into effect after the end of the session. Under normal circumstances, when the session ends, right, then the bill goes into effect after that. But that gives time for the referendum process to happen, which oftentimes 90 days, exactly.
After signing time.
90 days after the end of the session that you have in order to collect enough signatures. But there is a provision that allows them to include in the passage of any legislation what's called an emergency clause. And the emergency clause says that whatever they're passing the law about is so critical to our future that it must go into effect immediately upon the governor's signature. It can't wait that 90 days. So one of the issues that's happening with the referendums right now is these direct democracy bills that are being passed with an emergency clause, which means that if a referendum were to happen, it would have to follow the new rules in order to qualify, which means that if you qualify, you're proving to them that it's really not a problem to start with. So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, right? So that emergency clause provision, I think, is a really interesting part of the conversation.
But and I want to be clear too. You're calling it an emergency clause provision, but they're not using it how it's actually written in law. Because it says there's procedure that you have to take in order to put an emergency clause, and that's vote on this bill and then have debate and decide if it needs an emergency clause. Well, they just put it in the bill and vote once, and we challenged them. I was part of the lawsuit. We took it all the way to Supreme Court, and that's one of those where our new Supreme Court said, well, it says that, but it doesn't mean.
Quick question about current, recent referendums where they had problems. The abortion. What happened again with that? And is there any kind of, did the Attorney General not make a mistake or do incorrect things? And can we get any remediation on that?
So just to clarify, when we use our language here, it's not a referendum.
Okay.
Because a referendum is a vote on what the legislature does. So it's an initiative.
Initiative.
Right. And I mean, that's kind of, I use that all the time too, but yeah. But so the abortion amendment where they were disqualified had to do with paperwork. So it wasn't the Attorney General that disqualified them. It was the Secretary of State's office that
Okay.
said you didn't turn in the required paperwork on the canvassers, the people who are going out and collecting signatures. So it wasn't the signatures themselves, it wasn't the ballot title, it was the paperwork involved in the process behind the scenes that they ended up being disqualified. And then, they went to the state Supreme Court to try to get through that. But then the state Supreme Court sided with the Secretary of State's office.
Which I'm curious about because, which obviously I didn't have paid canvassers, I have much less paperwork, but when I was there, some of you saw I was missing paperwork for issues. And I could not file my paperwork at all without this affidavit. So me and my lawyer at the time, we got a piece of paper and we wrote and signed and notarized this affidavit in the room at like 4:57.
Right.
It was due at 5 p.m. So that was my biggest confusion on that. Is
Because they just let it go with
allowed?
abortion.
How are they allowed when I had to do that? So, and I didn't even I didn't even have enough signatures. I still filed them anyway. But how did that happen?
It's a great question.
Also,
How did that happen?
I mean, that was the question they tried to ask the
Because you
Supreme
didn't-
Court.
you didn't-
They-
I asked them
that wasn't the right question.
Have you had enough, they would have challenged it.
well, and we're talking about abortion, but let's switch over to marijuana. Because there's a procedure that we have to go through before we can collect signatures, and that is going to the Attorney General. So he goes through the whole thing that says, yes, this is a valid title, it'll hold constitutional muster. And I have sat in the room with the Attorney General and his people on multiple occasions. And they say, the reason we do this is if you're ever challenged after the fact, then we defend it in court. The Attorney General says, then it becomes my job to defend what I wrote an opinion on. Except just in this last election, he approved a marijuana petition that ended up going to the Supreme Court and they threw it out and he did not defend it. So why are we doing this?
I think you're asking a really good question, Steve. There can be no doubt in anyone's mind that all this legislation is to shut down direct democracy. Except for when people have a lot of money. That every time we go in front of them and say, this is why I don't like this, they're like, good. Then it's serving its purpose. I'm making it harder, good. I'm making people not want to be a canvasser because it's a criminal offense. Petition fraud, good. Whatever we tell them, we have to recognize and accept the fact that they are doing everything in their power and they are extremely powerful to stop this process. And whether we can do anything about it with the current administration and legislation, I don't know. I'm very pessimistic about it. This arbitrary throwing out of a canvasser's all of their petitions because he thinks they might have broken a rule, especially when we have these petition blockers out there who are complaining and trained to complain. I think it's like stick a fork in it.
Well, I think when you brought up that, money rules, really, when we're looking at this whole process, there is never going to be money behind a grassroots initiative. Because if there were money for that issue, it would already have gone through the legislature because they already would have been lobbying. We wouldn't need it. So I hate to be pessimistic, but if money rules, and then we're never gonna have money backing a grassroots initiative that is wanted by the people, we're always gonna be fighting the same battle.
And money is already ruling.
Right.
The people who are fighting the 4A Our Kids bill are for-profit school
Right.
systems. They are, and they're right behind Oliva, and they're very, very, I mean, one of the Waltons is, has money behind it. It's, I don't know what to tell you, but as all these things pass, I just feel like it's.
I mean, like, if For Our Kids had the money that the Waltons did, we wouldn't need a referendum because that would have never passed.
Theirs would have never passed.
That's what I'm saying. So,
Bobby, you wanna jump in here?
Yeah, sure. I think y'all are bringing up a lot of really great points. I don't know who was speaking about the signature throwing outing bill. What is it? SB 10, I think is the bill that we're talking about there, or SB 209. Yeah. So if the Secretary of State finds that there's a preponderance, or sorry, the Attorney General finds that there's a preponderance of evidence that a canvasser might have broken a rule, they get to just throw out all of the signatures collected by that canvasser. And the law is either intentionally ambiguous or unhelpfully ambiguous, or both. It doesn't clarify which signature pages of that canvasser get to be thrown out. So we have all sorts of logistical problems coming down the road for direct democracy. So let's say Gail wants to run a ballot initiative and I want to run a ballot initiative, and we share a super volunteer. And because Gail is really smart and does her homework, she properly trains that super volunteer. And because I'm lazy and kind of tired all the time because life is hard, I don't train that super volunteer appropriately. And let's say my super volunteer, because I've poorly trained them, breaks a rule. Now, the Attorney General or whomever gets to throw out all of the signatures collected by that super volunteer that Gail and I share. And it's my fault now on this campaign over here that none of their signatures are validly counted over on Gail's campaign. So we have all sorts of big new hurdles that we're going to have to jump over. And some of them are going to be legal hurdles, but some of them are just going to be logistical campaign hurdles. It's really tough. I echo y'all's sentiments that, cash is king in the campaign space. I'm a campaign guy. I run campaigns all over this part of the country, and every 2 years they get more and more expensive. It's just, literature is expensive. Labor is expensive. It's so expensive because you've got to pay hundreds of people for thousands of man hours. And, the going rate is much higher than it used to be, right? So it just gets very expensive to get these things on the ballot. And then let's say it does get on the ballot, then you have to run a whole campaign to get it, passed through the voters. So it's doubly expensive if you consider that really you're engaged in two different campaigns. One thing I'll say though, two things that I'll say that I think are a little more hopeful than I think any of us have any right to be. The first thing is this is getting more and more difficult because legislators are passing laws to make it more and more difficult. They're not changing our state constitution to make it more and more difficult, which is nice. The solution is to get policymakers on board with the direct democracy process again. And that's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of advocacy. It's going to take a lot of educating to different communities, right? I'm not entirely convinced that the state legislators really understand the referendum process or the initiative process, A, and then B, I know voters don't understand it, right? So anytime there's a coalition of organizations that wants to advocate for direct democracy or stand up for direct democracy, we have to start speaking about it in a way that voters are going to understand. I've just used two words that the average Arkansas voter just really has no concept of, right? Direct democracy. What does that mean? Referendum. What does that word mean? Initiative. What does that word mean? Right? We talk about it with very insider language, very technical legal language that's in the Constitution, but it doesn't land with voters. And so when we say things like the initiative and referendum process is under attack, it's true. It's absolutely true. But voters don't know what's under attack. They don't know what they're losing in some of these fights. And so we have to do a pretty big lift here. It's going to be a very heavy lift to educate legislators and to educate voters on how important this process is. And then the second part of that is, at the end of the day, the good thing about politicians is they can be replaced, right? And so, we need to create the expectation that the policymakers of the state of Arkansas will be accountable to the voters. And I know that's, this is the year 2025. That seems unimaginable, but that's needs to become a big priority for all of us moving forward, making sure that our lawmakers know that we expect them to support the direct democracy process. And some of the ones that are currently there, obviously they're not responsive to that, but that's what elections are for. And then the next thing I'd say is, yeah, money is really a huge part of this process in a really unfortunate way. I have been on direct democracy calls with national funders and coalitions of organizations. And I have been told by national funders after a coalition call that they're just not interested in investing in Arkansas because they don't see the level of collaboration and cooperation among on-the-ground organizations that they want to see. And so moving forward, with these hurdles just got higher. These things keep getting more and more expensive. The laws keep changing. We haven't even seen all the laws that are going to be pertinent to the direct democracy process. I think there is money out there that is interested in investing in positive policy change in the state of Arkansas. I think another heavy lift that we have to do is we all have to be on the same page. I think we have, and it's just not true that every organization that's concerned with the direct democracy process is going to support every ballot initiative, right? That's just not true because you've got issues from all over the ideological spectrum. But I do think it's going to become necessary in the future if we want to get any of these things funded for really strategic and intentional collaboration, doing these things together. And I think I think when we don't do that, we lose, right? Down the line, a political campaign, a policy advocacy campaign in the legislature, ballot initiatives, when there's not meaningful collaboration and sharing, divvying up responsibilities and sharing the work, we lose. We just get beat.
Thanks. And that kind of leads me into like the flip side of my first question, because I think you're pointing out like some of the things that are in place this session that are trying to be done, right? Building those coalitions, showing that people are paying attention, by having the direct action that combines both public testimony with protest, with heavy email and phoning campaigns, right, are all designed to try to get the legislature to understand that we are paying attention and watching. So I guess my next question for you would be, where do you see hope? Where do you see hope? Where do you see some positive opportunities in the process? And what are the things that you think we could be building on in order to maintain direct democracy? Steve, you're nodding, so I'm going to ask you to start.
Well, looking at where we are now versus where we were 3.5 years ago, when we started trying to put together that referendum, and we knew we were going to have to go after 50 counties, we started getting into Searcy County and Newton County and Cross County and Augusta. There's all these counties where we haven't had anybody from any political spectrum go into those spaces in 10 or 15 years. The Republicans aren't even going in there. They're just getting elected. They're not spending any money in those spaces. And since then, what we saw happen with the uprising of Capes and the statewide education that took place about what the referendum process was and what direct democracy was. And then when we had 7, 8 being circulated at the same at the same time, and I was out in the field, and you could go to a farmer's market in Fayetteville or Little Rock or whatever on a weekend, and there were dozens, if not hundreds of people collecting signatures. And there's hope in that we've, at least up until this session, which is why they came after us. They saw it too. I think that they saw the writing on the wall. We got 55,000 signatures with no money. We got 77,000 signatures with no money. We kept growing. Now this is going to push back because there's a lot of people that aren't going to be willing to go up against fraud and get a felony. But we have educated the public over the last 3 or 4 years. And though I agree with you, Bobby, they don't understand the language we're talking about when we use all this whatever, but we have set out intentionally to use this to educate the people and to tell them that you do have a voice. Because what I see is the problem in Arkansas politics is people just don't think that they have a voice. And we have shown people they do. And there are thousands of people in Arkansas right now that 3 years ago weren't even involved in the process. And now they're saying, I can make a difference. So that's the hope for me.
Thanks. Jenny, got anything?
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. In my own personal experience, 3 years ago, I was not doing this kind of work. I had just gotten into like some climate change organizations. I got to go to DC and lobby, and it kind of made me realize that as a normal person, not a career politician, I could make change in my community. And one of the things that I often will bring up is how do we teach other people? Because like I said before I was able to meet people, I didn't know even how to meet people. And, I guess I don't even know if it's gain trust, but, let people give me their resources for free. People were giving me resources for free and they didn't have to do that. And so, I don't know, I kind of got off tangent there, but I don't know. I think you're right. We educated a lot of people. And I think doing things like this and like chicken math and those types of things, like if we just continue, we just need to figure out ways to reach people, especially young people, which I think we now see that whereas before I thought maybe they didn't care as much, but they do. And we've got to figure out how to bridge that.
And the groups are working more together.
They are. Oh yeah.
There
Especially
is more collaboration.
Yeah, this huge event this weekend.
3 years ago, this collaboration wasn't taking place.
Yeah, I think about like when we called for direct action at the beginning of the direct democracy bills, when Amber's bills were first coming in, and we had such a broad coalition of people. We had everybody from some of the most conservative, conservative people that are speaking in front of the legislature through the most liberal or the leftist groups, standing in the same room, arm in arm, talking about how we're all trying to basically do the same thing. And those kind of coalitions, I think, are really super important. And I mentioned this the other day to the DSA group because they were very instrumental. They happened to be at the Capitol one day when we were trying to put some bills, trying to speak up against the bills, and they happened to be there doing an entirely different protest. But we were like, hey, will you come in? They're like, sure, And so all of a sudden we had people that didn't even necessarily think that they were completely involved in this joining in. And to me, that's, I think you're absolutely right, Carol.
I ask the panel question. So one of the things that has occurred to me, and I'm interested in your opinions, is would we be better off for this next go round to just try to do one and knock the ball out of the park on one referendum rather than divide? Like, I don't know if we get enough people who wanted to, would be passionate about one initiative. But if we had all of those people just signing one thing, would that be a strategy to actually, despite all this stuff that they've added to the process, would that be a way for us to, rather than overwhelm ourselves with 8, just do one really clear, concise thing? I mean, what I always tell people is you're losing your right to change the minimum wage. You're giving that up. You understand that. Is there some issue we could all get around, show Bobby's fundraisers that were coalesced around an issue and it, I mean, but maybe you think more is better. I don't know. I'm just.
Well, I was just gonna say, the ones that were circulating, those were the only ones filed.
Right.
There are like 13, 14, 15 different proposals. So you've got people from all over the state who are filing their issue. So don't forget about them. They might not
Now,
go collect signatures.
But I'm
they
curious
still file.
if we could get everybody on one.
I
You
think
know,
that
like,
would
we're
be
not
the
the paper ballot people, maybe not, but you know.
I think that would be the issue, is getting everybody, you know, who's to say that I don't want mine to go first.
Right.
Or, you know, something
But
like
that was his point, is we can't agree on anything.
Yeah.
But I think I
Everybody's
think
got
with
their own
this,
special interests.
I think with this sort of thing, not that I don't know that we'll ever get to that point, but we are now talking to each other, we're now discussing, we're now sharing resources where we weren't doing that before. I don't know. I mean, in the perfect world, like that sounds really nice. But I don't know.
On the one hand, like, I mean, I carried a bunch, 7 or 8, whatever it was. And,
Right.
but there was kind of like, it was almost like maybe we need a happy medium, because I would have some people who would be attracted to a certain one. But when, like, they didn't know about the period poverty project, no idea. But they came to me looking for marijuana.
Yeah.
Not the substance, the petition. And it only helped with one of those two. And so, but they would come wanting to sign this one. Hey, have you heard about the period poverty project? Oh, no, I haven't heard about that one. I love that. However, on the other side of that, they'd get to like 5 or 6 and go, I'm done. I can't sign anymore. And where there might have been a couple that they might have been interested in, but they were just, it was July.
Wait till we have to read them all.
It
to
was
them.
July, yes. So I don't know, I mean, I don't think it's possible that everyone agree on one and get behind one, maybe 2 or 3. But if we're gonna have to read them all, I mean, I don't know, I just, somewhere in the middle, I think.
Well, I'm thinking it's something about changing this process. That's what I'm thinking.
Right.
There's going to be a direct democracy amendment run,
Yeah.
which might coalesce a lot of these together. We tried to do that in this life, moving into it. Like, we were meeting with groups that were very wide. Like, we had abortion, we had everybody, I think we had like 65 people on one call at once. When we were like trying to decide before anybody filed anything. But the one thing we all have to remember, this is about passion. And reproductive rights is a passion for a large segment of the population. I mean, like, I don't care about FOIA. And the other side, like, we had problems in this campaign, y'all, because the FOIA campaign was primarily started and run by Republicans. And the reproductive rights was primarily run by Democrats or liberals. And they were fighting in the parking lots with each other. They were not allowing other people to get in their territory with the abortion bill or with the other bill. And then there was repercussions against each other. I think that there's too much passion about issues. I think that's what we want, but I think it's gonna be tough. I'm gonna try it different, just so everybody else knows. I think it's going to take perfecting this. If we don't, I think it's going to take a lot of processes and systems and figuring things out based on what runs. And I'm going to encourage, we're going to run one in Jacksonville to change the voting system in Jacksonville. We've already got a big group. We're already putting a campaign together. We're already talking to the mayor and the council people. We're already talking to the citizens on what they want. And I think we will get less scrutiny from the Secretary of State, the Attorney General. They're still going to scrutinize us. But we're going to go through the count instead of through the Secretary of State. So I think we can refine some processes and create some systems that we can. It's going to take some work.
Did you have a question?
You just said what I was thinking,
What's that?
to go to the people in the counties, build your coalition and then take it upstairs. And the other part of that would be, the second part of that is to start looking for candidates that you wanna run in these offices to replace what we already have. Because apparently they're not listening to us. So the end game is to replace everybody who is not paying attention to us with someone who is more user friendly.
Well, and if we do it, and Gail and I have talked about this for 3 years. If we all came together and had a coalition, said, we're gonna run this, they're making the decision. Instead of getting down into the community, into Jacksonville, into the neighborhood, and working with the community, and they're saying, this is what we need to do. And then organizing around that. I don't know
So
if that
taking
makes
it
sense.
down to a community level, so going back to real grassroots organizing. And instead of thinking about everything on the state level, start thinking about it on a local level and what needs to happen there. You know, it was interesting because the thought I had tonight was like, I know, for an example, one of the things that the city of Little Rock is talking a lot about is their public safety issues and where they're gonna be spending their money in terms of providing support. What is it called? The shot block or shot?
Shot fire,
Sharpshooter.
sharp fire and what's the other one?
Flock cameras. And
Yeah,
The cameras and
it's a whole surveillance
Going to
system.
the-
And so while Kristen was talking there, I was thinking, oh, that's really interesting. I haven't heard anybody talking about setting up a referendum, should that be passed, right? And taking on a local level, but I think that might be the level of organizing.
Cause once we've taught people how to organize and do the system and
Right.
jump through the
Then
hoops
roll it
there.
out.
Well, and that's the thing too, is just getting that information, because I didn't have a clue. I didn't have anybody to go to. My lawyer was not helpful. So just if there is some sort of infrastructure for people, and then we can support each other.
So, Steve, I'm not arguing that you shouldn't do what you are doing, but I will tell you that it's illogical to me that we go and do 8 more constitutional amendments in a much, or whatever they were, ballot initiatives, whatever the correct terminology is, in a environment that is even more difficult. Remember, nothing got on last time, nothing. So to just continue to do the same thing in a more difficult environment seems like insanity to me. I think we need to focus, and I'm not even you guys are the experts, I'm just a, a retired person with too much time on their hands. I think we really need to think about what is the one ballot initiative we could get out there to reverse some of this, so 2 years later, all of your work has a shot. Because right now, I honestly don't think you have a shot. I mean, maybe at a local level, but statewide, I don't think so.
And I wanted to comment on the local level. This last election cycle, we did see the paper ballot issue group. They didn't make it at the state level, and so for the first time that I've noticed, a ballot issue group then went local. And they went to 8 or 9 different counties and submitted the same exact language. And for me, that was a first.
Right.
And so now you're seeing the canvasser rules at the state level starting to be applied at the local level. So
Yeah,
if you're interested in local level, you really need to start thinking, okay, so there's a bill right now that if you are doing a local campaign, you have to be a person who lives in that county. Right now, that is not a requirement. It has to be an Arkansas resident. So they're looking at even narrowing that at the local level. So
Well, that
just
was
be
gonna be my
aware.
question then is, are the rules different on the local level for these ballot
They
initiatives?
have been, but they're now, because of the paper ballot issue, turning their attention to the local campaigns and saying, oh, well, you know what, we didn't apply this to this and we need to apply this. So like, what was it? There was a alcohol issue
And then Clay County had an issue.
and the Supreme Court said, no, it's not gonna count because these canvasser rules also apply to the alcohol, to the wet dry issue, even though the wet dry issue had different parameters than other local issues. So there's even different signature requirements for some like for the alcohol.
Different types of.
Yes.
Yeah, different signature requirements.
That's a lot to learn.
So for example, if you're running a library funding bill, you only need 100 signatures. But if you're doing alcohol, you need 38% of
The
the
entire voting population.
of the registered, was it registered voters or number of people who voted for governor? 38% versus 100. And so now they're applying the rules for citizenship. You have to be a citizen of Arkansas. You have to be a resident of that community. You have to, if you're a paid canvasser, you have to start following the paid canvasser rules. So I mean, there's a lot that's now because of that one group that went. Say what?
Those are also different from one county to another?
No,
Okay.
it's all this, it's the
all the
same.
Okay.
But those rules that were state, they're now going, oh, because of the paper ballot issue, this is the first campaign to do this. We need to start focusing on the county level too.
And go ahead.
Well, I was gonna ask, so for example, like to keep like hog manure out of the Buffalo River and in Northern County, there's 3 or 4 of them. Pulaski County would not, you couldn't sign something down for a ballot here to.
It depends on how you do that. So let's say the legislature passes a law, then you can do a referendum that's statewide. But if you're at the county level, you can't do a local referendum on a state issue. You can only do a local referendum on a city council or a county court decision.
You'd have to find somebody in that county to file that or.
You can't.
You couldn't do it.
No, I understand that, but
Yeah,
you'd have
yeah.
to find somebody.
No, nobody.
No,
Rest-
yeah,
oh.
we would have to be a statewide. If it's done by the legislature, it has to be a statewide campaign. If it's a county, like for example, Pulaski County has a watershed, it has watershed zoning rules. The residents of Pulaski County could have tried to have done a referendum, they even thought about it. They could have done a referendum on that county decision. But so it has to match which body is doing the decision making. So for example, if it's a city, then it has to be city residents who are doing it and not just countywide residents.
And this is one of the issues that comes up and why we're always talking against the state preempting local decision making, right? So for an example, there was a bill that I think it's made its way through the Senate and is on the way to the House, but it had to do with renters' rights. And it was a local ordinance that was passed in Fayetteville that limited the amount of the application fee that could be charged. And so it was a local ordinance that was done, so now they're trying to pass a statewide, so that could have been handled on a referendum. But now they're trying to pass a statewide law that says that local cities don't have the right to make those kinds of ordinances. So they're gonna preempt it up to the state level, so then if it wanted to be changed, the referendum would have to be a statewide referendum. So it's one of the problems that happens as the states begin to try to preempt local jurisdiction as well, and it gets very complicated and very cumbersome to try to deal with. So we're at like almost 8 o'clock, so I'm gonna give you, if you don't mind, just each of you like 30 seconds, not possible, maybe a minute and a half, but very short, just like what do you want us to walk away with tonight? What do you want us to know? Bobby, I'll have you start.
Yeah, I think, and this just echoes Steve and Shanie's remarks from earlier. I think the thing to take away from the initiatives that were run in 2024 was that a handful of them came up short by just a couple hundred votes. And yes, that process is going to be harder moving forward. And so it will take a lot more time to collect the same number of signatures. But a system of people, human capital has been trained and gathered and motivated over the last couple years that's never existed in the state of Arkansas before. And I find that to be extremely encouraging. And it's the work of people like Steve and Shanie who've accomplished that. And so, sure, there's going to be some fall off of people who don't want to mess with the new requirements and people who don't want to mess with the legal potentialities, but a lot of those people are ready to saddle back up. And so I think though it's hard, and it's going to be even harder in the future, all the people are still here in Arkansas, who worked on those campaigns for the most part, right? And I think that group of people who's willing to do that really hard work only grows into the future. And I think these things are eminently doable, though very, very, very difficult, right? So that's where I'm at on it. I'm encouraged by the results from this last go around, though we came up short across the board, right? We got really close.
Thanks. Kristin, you got any last words for us?
Sure. I'm a big believer in succession planning and think that it's really important as these groups work together that they build those new roles for attorneys who might say yes. So instead of relying on one or two attorneys for everything, to build that succession, to build that next generation of people who want to be involved in this process and share that information so they don't have to learn it over again themselves. Because it seems like a lot of the people who were involved in like the 80s and 90s, they're gone. And so it's like you have to keep rebuilding this knowledge base. And then also, just a quick plug for our voter guide. I'm so excited. Every election cycle, I get calls in May. Hey, when's your voter guide out? So people are starting to expect it and know that it's there. And I have to say, hey, the ballot's not even set yet. So thank you for your interest, but it'll be a couple of months. So people are aware, but the broader the audience we can reach, the better. So I will just always ask y'all to help us reach more people.
Thank you. Shanie?
Kind of the same thing. One thing that was told to me when Roe v. Wade happened was become the expert in your friend group. So if you have resources, if you have connections, connect those people. Even if you don't know everything about it, there's a voter guide. There's so many resources out there. Just, I know it's naive of me to say, to not talk about politics with people, but talk about issues. We're an issue-heavy state. So if there's, just connect with people and share that passion with each other, and I think it can grow.
Thank you. Steve?
I would say that when I started this journey personally, and I went to multiple people saying, hey, we want to run a referendum, we got people that want to do this. Everywhere I went was impossible. You're wasting your time. Impossible, wasting your time. And groups that are heavily involved now I'm not wasting my time with them. And we knew it was going to be hard. And like Bobby said, we jumped through the hoops. And we almost got there. And in my opinion, abortion did get there. In my opinion, marijuana did get there. And I believe that what we really should do, Carol, is all come together and run a constitutional amendment that says the legislator cannot add to the ballot initiative process and repeal anything they've ever done. And then get 55 or get the 90,000 signatures on that and repeal everything they've ever said and go back to the original constitution.
Sound like a plan to me.
Yes.
Thank you.
Steve.
Thank you. And, of course, I just have to say that, to me, it's all about the educational piece of it.
Right.
So I just am very, very grateful that you've all shown the interest in learning a little bit more about our system, for the opportunity to kind of bring that educational piece to the community. I know that there are a number of organizations, the colleges, the schools are trying to get more and more involved in providing education. And I think my one takeaway from this legislative session is I think we have a tremendous opportunity to educate our legislators on the direct democracy process, because it's obvious by the comments that they make that they don't have a clue how it works. They don't understand the difference between signature collection and getting it on the ballot. They don't understand the difference between paid canvassers and volunteer canvassers. So I think that there is a lot of educational opportunity available, and I just want to thank you all for giving us the opportunity in Arkansas Civic Action Network to bring you these kinds of things so that we can hopefully, keep pushing that forward. So thank you to our wonderful panel. going out. Before you walk out, many of you signed the petition to have our congressman in the second district, French Hill, and our 2 senators come to the town hall. If any of you represent groups, especially grassroots groups, that would be interested in signing on as part of this process, we would really appreciate that as well. And again, thank you so much, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, it's gonna also be a panel, and that is gonna be a panel of attorneys that are gonna talk very specifically about what we affectionately call, if all else fails, sue their asses. And it's gonna be about how the court system can be part of this process as well. So thanks to everybody.
Oh, yeah.